The biggest mistake I think people make on their homestead is choosing the wrong animal. Now, this is actually a very wide topic for all different animals, but specifically what we're talking about here is dairy. And when it comes to dairy, there are tons of different options. I'm not going to be covering sheep, and to the dismay of one of my commenters, I'm also not going to be talking about water buffalo. We're going to be covering goats and cows. Why goats and cows? Well, it tends to be that most people choose between goats and cows when it comes to their dairy options. There are many people out there who swear by sheep's milk, butter, cream, all these things. I just haven't had any experience with them, and they're not as prolific as everybody says. And I think that the two options really come down to goats and cows anyway. Now, I've already actually made a video on why I think most people are more suited to have goats than cows, but I don't want to give my opinion here. I want to give you some careful considerations that you can go through on your own so that you can choose on which animal is best for you on your homestead. So let's just get right into this. Practical consideration number one is poop. So goats and cows are both ruminant animals. They both have four-chambered stomachs, and they're kind of similar in the way that the bacteria inside of their first chamber breaks down the organic material by bacteria, bringing it through the rest of their chambers and then spitting it out their backside. Goat's poop is very similar to rabbit poop. It comes out in these little pellets and they spread throughout your field, refertilizing everything, and you don't have to really deal with them out in your fields. It's not that big of a deal. Flies don't really go to it crazy, and it's very manageable and very easy. You don't need anything special, and when it comes to cleaning inside of the barn, all you do is sweep it up and throw it out. It basically just turns to dust even inside of the barn, and it's pretty easy to deal with. I hardly ever see it as I walk down through my pastures. Of course, sometimes I'll walk around and see goat poop. They basically poop while they walk a lot of the times, so they easily spread that throughout everything. A cow's poop is much different. As you may have seen before, or even be able to imagine, it's these little pancake patties that fall on the ground. They're actually really great for fertilizing your ground and bringing nutrients back into the soil after they eat. It's a great thing, just like goats. They're even better for the soil because the microorganisms inside of their body just tend to be even better for the grass. Now, here's the big problem, that if they're not being managed or taken care of, just leaving that cow poop in the soil could be a breeding ground for parasites, for flies, and tons of other things, and not to mention the smell, or many other things. So if you have a cow and you don't want to be cleaning up their cow poop or driving a harrow around them, you got to get chickens. And the chickens, what they do is they actually naturally find that cow poop. What they're doing is they're looking for fly larvae, bug larvae, they're looking for grain that was left behind, or anything that's inside of that cow poop. They search for it, they scratch it up, they throw it around, and that is great as fertilization, but you need to have the chickens do the work for you. Otherwise, you're just having a lot more work for yourself. Goats, on the other hand, I don't really have to do anything. They naturally break down into the soil once they dry out super easily, and it's no big deal. One of the best things about both of these animals, though, is that both of their poop can be composted down, put back into the garden, or spread throughout your field if taken care of properly, and you add nutrients right back to the field. There's one big thing, is that cows give you so much more. So there's way more to do with it. The applications are greater just because of sheer quantity, and it's easier to collect if your chickens aren't going around and scraping through it. Because other than the barn, you can't really go through your field and pick up your little goat poops. You got to get it from the barn that you end up sweeping up. And that leads us to the next thing. So number two, that is shelter. Cows don't need a shelter. They can stay outside in the wild doing whatever they want, rain, shine, heat, whatever. They're gonna find shade if they need it. They'll turn their backs to the wind or the rain and they'll be fine. Goats, on the other hand, they hate weather. The second that there's a little spit of rain, tiny little drop, they are running for the shelter, running for the barn, and they will be in there until it stops raining. And that is just not the case with cows. Sometimes they'll even forage through the rain. It doesn't really matter to them. Goats need shelter. They need 3 walls. Okay, let me say this. Goats don't specifically need it. There are people who do it without it. But especially if there are harsher winters, you definitely need it, especially with wind. They like to lay on the ground, and if it's really cold and wet, they're gonna hate it. They will search for higher ground to get out of the rain, to get out of the mud. They really prefer shelter. So anything you could do for goats, they definitely need that. A cow, you just put out there and it doesn't really matter what the weather situations are. Now, before I get somebody out there in the comments, yes, a little bit, it does kind of matter about weather situations, especially with a cow who's in milk. A lot of the times what can happen with a cow in milk, if she lays down on the floor, this will go for a goat too, if she lays down on the floor and it's below zero, what can happen is their udders will freeze. The actual milk on the inside freezes, which can give them frostbite. Massive problems can happen to both of them. So yes, there are issues with being outside in weather, but with a cow, what you can do is throw a bunch of hay on the floor, separating the ground contact, the heat just generated from that, and them laying down is going to keep them safe. So yes, there are some considerations, but overall, a cow doesn't really need to be inside of a barn or in shelter. Goats they really should be. And that means when goats are in shelter, they need a little bit more food because they're not going to be outside foraging, which leads us, number 3, the food that they eat. Goats are a lot less picky when it comes to cows. They don't eat everything, like a lot of people say. They don't eat tires. I'm sure given them not eating anything, they'll chew on anything, but they don't eat everything. What they do is they eat things that cows don't really like all the time. They'll eat things that are thicker, and they'll browse through stuff that's harder for a cow to really care about, because a goat's palate, or their top dental pad that they have, because they don't have top teeth. Goats and cows don't have top teeth. Well, a goat will be able to pick through that stuff easier. Their hard dental pad that they have is a lot more suited to thistles and spiky things and just general harder stuff. This means that goats have a larger variety of food sources because they're browsers. They can eat more, and it's less restrictive when it comes to what they eat. So dealing with goats in this fashion just tends to be a little bit easier. You don't have to be so picky about the food that you bring onto your property, or hay that you buy, or foraging the ground, because they're browsers and they'll do really fine with a lot less and a lot less picky type of feed. And that kind of leads us into number 4, which is going to be broken up a little bit more. This is going to be a longer section, and it has to do with maintenance. Now, a cow tends to be higher maintenance. Now, despite the fact that goats break out and they have issues on that side, or they have issues when it comes to breaking trees, fun fact, I've never wanted to get rid of my goats more than when they broke out and killed nearly all of my baby trees. I wanted to get rid of them more than I've ever wanted to get rid of any animal. I can actually keep my cow around these trees and they are never touched. Look, there she is right there. If my goats were inside of this place right here, I'll promise you this, none of these leaves would be here, period. They wouldn't go for the grass, they'd go straight for these trees. Now, despite that, cows are more maintenance. You may be surprised to find out that a cow can bloat and die over tons of different things. Now, real quick, let's understand this. Like I said before, they're both ruminant animals. Their stomachs work very similar. So both animals can bloat and die for many different things. But cattle have a larger tendency to put themselves into situations or eat things or do stuff that bloating is way more of an issue when it comes to cattle than it is goats. Just in case you're unaware of what bloating is when one of the chambers of the stomachs of a ruminant animal swells up with gases and causes them to die. And this can happen for many different reasons. In that first stomach of a ruminant animal, there's a lot of fermentation that happens between bacteria, protozoa, enzymes, and if that balance goes off, a lot of gases is created. And when that gas is created, that swells up. It can kill them within 2 hours. 1 to 2 hours, at the first sign of bloat, your cow is dead. What can happen is you're not even around to see what they got into or what caused the bloat, so you just come home to a dead cow. Now, this doesn't happen all the time. It's not so frequent, but it's absolutely something to consider. A large part of the cattle industry won't feed their cattle on hills, because what can happen is a cow loves to lay down. If their head is facing downhill, they will bloat and die. This doesn't mean you can't raise a cow on a hill. It's just a practical consideration. Goats, on the other hand, don't have as big of a problem when it comes to bloating. I've actually never really heard of it in a widespread way, but I just need to say it can happen to both of them. However, goats, like cows, but cows are less of an issue, can have very, very bad parasite issues. How we manage parasites is preemptive. We like to give diatomaceous earth in their feed and give them wormwood through regiments because wormwood is a very good dewormer. We've never had issues because we're on top of it, but one thing that you can really watch out for, one thing you need to watch out for in similar fashion to bloat on a cow is parasites. Now, another thing when it comes to maintenance, it's trimming hooves. Cows do need their hooves trimmed, and if not, they can go lame. If they go lame, it can cause many different issues. But goats also need their hooves trimmed. Now, when it comes to trimming a goat's hooves, most people could do it at home at their milking stand, and it could be done in moments. It's pretty easy, and if you're interested, I can do an entire video just on how to make sure that your goat's hooves are trimmed. A cow, on the other hand, is a lot different because unless you feel confident enough or skilled enough, or your cow is tame enough, you can't do it yourself. You're gonna have to bring in somebody to do it for you. This isn't as big of a deal to where a cow's hooves need to be trimmed as frequently as a goat's, but they definitely need to be trimmed, especially if the cow is getting grain. Grain, I have heard it said, grows horn and hoof. So a cow or goat, on that matter, that is eating grain will grow larger hooves and horns quicker, which will lead them into needing trimmings more often. Last thing for maintenance for now, this could have been brought up for shelter, but it works here too. The big thing that you should probably pair with your goats are some sort of livestock guardian, because when it comes to coyotes, they don't care. They'll go after the young or even the larger goats. Same thing with sheep. Cows, maybe they'll go for one of the cows young, maybe they'll go for a calf, but they generally don't, because the cow, the mom, if she's a good mom, is with them. She'll watch over her baby. And cows are just too big and scary and not manageable for a coyote or a predator to really go after. So they tend to be safer out in the field. That's not the case when it comes to goats. Goats should be locked up at night for their protection from predators, or kept safe by a livestock guardian of some sort. We are fully fenced in at 14 acres, and our property is protected by 3 dogs, 2 livestock guardians. They are Great Pyrenees, and by having these 3 dogs, we have them roam everywhere and access to everywhere. They have done an incredible job at keeping larger predators out. Sometimes foxes are able to make their way through because we have all these trees, and they sneak their way around the dogs. But when it comes to a coyote, they like to make a lot of noise and yip and test things before they jump over a fence. So I don't really have the issue of predators because of those dogs. And let's go for the last one for now. That's number 5, and that is cost. Cows obviously have a much bigger upfront cost and a bigger cost when it comes to maintaining their feed requirements. But a great thing about a cow, despite their upfront cost and their feed costs, is they can actually pay for themselves, in my experience, a lot easier than a goat can. There's a lot less of a market for people going out there and buying goat's milk. There's also a lot less quantity of goat's milk per milking. So if you're in a state that allows you to sell the milk in some capacity through a herd share or through pet milk, there's probably going to be less people in search of looking for goat's milk than they are for cows. There is a lot wider of a market for people looking into cow's milk. Now, this really is beneficial because it really does help for the winter bills when it comes to feeding with hay, and depending on if you're doing grain or not, that could be very expensive. So at any point, if you can sell the milk, it will help you deal with the quantity of milk that you get from a cow, but also the feed bills of having a cow. And when a cow does have a baby, and it is a heifer, and it's a good cow, you could sell that cow for the same price you bought your original one for. And then when you go to sell a cow, the price is much more than it is for a goat. Being able to make back that cost of buying a cow a lot more reasonable. And you really only need one for the amount of milk that you want for your family and maybe your local community in that little area, if you're allowed to sell them. Goats, on the other hand, you need more. But here's another thing real quick as a little last thing before I go. You should probably have more than one cow, mainly because they're herd animals. They can be fine on their own, depending on the cow, but really they should be around another one. I hope that was helpful. Having you choose between goats and cows, these are just some of the many practical considerations that we need to be aware of when choosing these animals. Now, like I said before, I did post a video about why I think it's best for most people to actually choose goats and not cows. And if you're interested in that video at all, it will be linked at the end card of this video, so go check that one out. And I've actually been teasing at an alpaca care guide video for a while. So if that's something that you're interested in, let me know in the comments. Let's talk about this. Would you choose a cow or a goat in the long run? Let me know.